Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are diving into the crucial role that escrow plays in California real estate transactions. Joining me in the studio today is my good friend and trusted escrow officer, Jennifer Schneck from Wonderland Escrow, to help us unravel the mysteries of escrow and equip you with the knowledge you need to ensure a smooth and successful closing. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm thrilled to have you here because if there is just one thing that I love more than opening an escrow with you, it's closing an escrow with you.
Don't we all?
Right? Yes, exactly. I would love to talk about this with you because it is such an important part of any buyer's or seller's transaction. And at the same time, I still think there's so much mystery involved in what is escrow, what happens during the escrow process, why is it so important? So you've been in the business for what, 20 plus years? How long have you been an escrow officer?
About 24 years.
24 years, okay,
Yep.
So that means you've seen a lot of real estate cycles, you've seen a lot of crazy transactions, and you are the perfect person to walk us through from opening to closing. So I'm going to start with just the very basics. You know, when I explain to one of my clients, you know, congratulations, we have contract acceptance, we're going to open escrow. One of the first questions, especially for my first time buyers, is like, what's that? You know, so I'm going to let you take it from here. How would you explain escrow?
Well, escrow is a neutral third party. We're kind of the ones that hold everybody together, for lack of a better term. We make sure that the buyers, the sellers, both real estate agents, the lender, if there's a mortgage broker involved, title, all of them kind of work in unison to get done what needs to get done in order for us to go ahead and get the transaction closed.
Awesome. So that would include really safeguarding all the parties. Because you're the neutral third party, you hold on to the funds, you hold on to the property documents, right?
Correct.
And you make sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to do in the time frame that they're supposed to do it.
Correct.
So that the title ownership of the property can transfer. Whoever needs to get their money gets their money. The county gets the documents that they need, and then everything is tied up with a bow.
With a nice little bow.
A nice little bow. And then pop the champagne, right?
There
Okay.
we go.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the very first steps. I know as a non-negotiable tradition of ours is the moment we have that contract acceptance, the fully executed documents, you and your team will get an email from me saying, Jen and team, we're excited to open this new escrow with you. The buyers are so-and-so, sellers are so-and-so, the purchase price is this, the contract acceptance date is that, here are the timelines. Then you take after. What is one of the first things that either a buyer or a seller can expect to hear from you at that point in time once we quote unquote open that escrow?
Well, first and foremost, let me just say I wish all real estate agents would send me emails like you do because it really does take away a lot of my questions that I may have. But what is next for us as far as the buyer and seller are concerned is that we send out an email and or we will give them a phone call saying congratulations on the purchase, on the sale, whichever one it is, and then kind of give them just a brief, quick lowdown as far as what it is that they can expect to be seen from us through the escrow transaction.
Okay, so elaborate on that a little bit more. What is it that they can expect to see from you?
Documents that might be coming from us, things that we might need from them. If they're a trust, we're going to need a copy of their trust documents. If they are an LLC or a corporation, we're going to need a copy of their entity documents. If the buyer is an LLC, same thing. We're going to need your entity documents. You know, explanation is if there is like, you know, for all the properties in Los Angeles, we have to order the residential property records disclosure report from the city, from the Department of Building and Safety. It is a requirement. So we let the sellers know up front, you know, this is what it's going to, this is something that we have to do. This is the cost that's going to be involved. If it's a condo, the HOA documents that we have to order, you know, the potential upfront fee that their HOA is going to charge, just things to expect throughout the transaction.
Very good. Yeah, because there is a lot that goes on.
Yes.
And I don't think, as much as a real estate broker, I try to set the tone of what to expect. At the same time, I don't want to unnecessarily overwhelm the client with so many details until it really becomes time that we need to get into that process. So it's really great that you kind of unveil what the next steps are going to be so that they know to keep an eye out for important documents. One of the things that you had mentioned, that if the buying or selling, the buyer or seller is an entity like a trust or an LLC, you'll need those documents. What if they're not? What if they're just a natural person? There is a document that you require them to fill out to kind of like really verify who they are, right? Talk
Yes.
to us about that.
It's a statement of information. It is a document that the title company requires. It just has their basic personal information, where they've been, where they've lived for the last few years, what it is that they do for a living. The reason why title requires this is because if there's any liens or judgments that may pop up against their names when title does their search, it's a way for us to confirm and or verify whether or not those liens actually belong to them.
Right. So, for example, let's take a name, John Smith. There could be so many John Smiths.
Right.
How do you know that the lien is the responsibility of this John Smith, who's the owner of the home, versus some other John Smith? Correct.
So usually how they determine it is that they determine it by the Social Security number. Mm-hmm. So usually most judgments or liens will have the last 4 digits of someone's Social Security number referenced on it. If not, then they probably would do it based off of their address that's referenced on the lien. So the statement of information allows the title company to confirm whether or not the last 4 digits on the lien actually are the same last 4 digits that the seller has provided or the buyer has provided.
Right. Okay. So then when it comes to this statement of information, it is really important that it is filled out not only accurately, but also in a timely manner early on in the escrow process. Wouldn't you say that the timing of getting this stuff into you promptly is also important?
Yes. Most escrow transactions are 30 days, which in reality is 20, because we really only have 4 weeks and it's 20 working days.
Right.
With weekends and everything included. Well, maybe more like 25. So the sooner we can get paperwork back from both buyer and seller, the better. Opening packages are typically sent out within 24 hours of us receiving the buyer's deposit. So we do a follow-up with them if we haven't received them within 3 days. We'll do another follow-up again at day 5 if we still don't have them back. And then after that, we pretty much have to bug them. So it might become a daily nag that we have to do with them going, we need your paperwork, we need your paperwork. Sellers more so than buyers, only because, if the seller has a mortgage that's against their property, we of course need to order the payoff demand that will be required in order for us to close. And we don't know who to order it from until the sellers inform us as far as who their lender is.
Right. And no buyer is going to be taking title to a home where there is still an open mortgage from
from the
that
seller.
belongs to somebody else. Let's go back to a couple minutes ago when you had mentioned the buyer's deposit. This is a really important and crucial step in the escrow because, for many reasons, one of which being this is really where the buyer puts their money where their mouth is. They have expressed an interest in purchasing this home, wiring or otherwise depositing these earnest funds really proves to the seller and to all the parties that this is real. This is my good faith deposit. And I had our good friend Mark Stipkovich, who you know from Lawyers Title, and we had great guy, super knowledgeable, and we had a great time talking about wire fraud, which is, I know, right? Let's roll our eyes. It is just pervasive and it's dangerous. I mean, people can really lose a lot of money that they've worked so hard to save if they don't take certain precautions when it comes to wiring these funds. So let's specifically take a few minutes to talk about the procedures that really should be followed, the best practices, if you will, surrounding the earnest money deposit. Okay?
Well, first and foremost, it's absolutely crucial for the buyer to contact the escrow officer or escrow company when they receive the wire instructions from them to confirm that the information on the form that they received is correct. There have been one too many times that these hackers can get into emails. They can change numbers around. They can change names around. They can make it look like it's coming from the actual person. I've had it. I mean, thankfully, the 2 times that I've had it happen to me, the buyer has been smart enough to call and ask questions, because when they forwarded the email to me, it literally looked like it was an email from me. It was my same font. It was my signature line on the bottom. The only thing that was different was the email address at the top. So it's very, very crucial for them to call and confirm that the information that they are receiving is actually true and correct. We have gone so far as to not only do we send the wire instructions to the buyer through a secured encrypted email, we also do not put our account number on our wire instructions, specifically for the fact to make sure that the buyers do call to confirm the information, and then we can provide them our account number at that time.
So smart, because oftentimes, escrow companies don't do that. Sometimes they'll just do one, they'll send an encrypted email, but the account number will be in there. But you and your company take an added layer of protection. So it's not only sent through an encrypted email, but they have no choice but to call you and get the correct information. As a real estate broker myself, who represents a lot of buyers and sellers, but this is particularly geared to my buyers because it's the buyers who are at risk at this stage. It's their money who is that is going to be sent out. I always have the conversation with them that you cannot be too careful.
Never.
Call me, confirm the escrow's phone number. I will give it to them directly. Talk to this person or this person because I know them personally, Ask for Jen, ask for Anita,
Right.
So, and I can't tell you how good it makes me feel that we, I think as an industry now, are more on the same page about really safeguarding buyers in light of these really increasing amounts of hacking attacks and wire fraud. So it makes me super happy when, one of my buyers calls me and is like, okay, I called Jen, I confirmed. I was like, good girl, there you go, you did it. Your money's going to be safe, because the alternative it could be very devastating. When I was speaking with Mark about, is there any recourse? Can you catch these bad actors? And, he said that if it's done, like if you catch it early enough, there may be a chance. Maybe be a chance.
Maybe.
But if you let like even a day go by,
correct.
Heaven forbid, even longer, like it's toast. Goodbye. You're never going to see it again.
Sure.
So this is a point that I always drive home. Always call and confirm the wire instructions, not just in the beginning of a transaction, but also at the end, which is typically when wire fraud tends to come into play, is closer to the end of a transaction, actually. Right. Isn't that the case?
That is the case, because a lot of times what happens is that these hackers will get a hold of an email, maybe not necessarily something that I've sent, because we do have a lot of firewalls and security and protection from an escrow standpoint, but I know that a lot of agents, if they've got a Gmail account or a Yahoo account, they may not have the security that a corporation or a company would to protect their emails. So, hackers kind of go to and real estate agents' email address, kind of see the conversations that have been going back and forth, and then I don't know what they do, but somehow or another, like I said, they get a hold of an email from me, send it off to the buyer, saying, oh, we want you to send in your money. We need you to send it to this location. And again, if the buyers are just crazy busy and they're not paying attention, they'll be like, oh, okay, whatever. The one instance that I had was I had the real estate agent actually contact me and say, why are you asking for my buyer's final funds? We're not scheduled to close for another week and a half. So, of course, my response was, I never sent an email to your buyer. Yes, you did. Yeah. And I said, no, sir, I'm sorry. I did not send one. Can you forward me the email that they received? And so when he forwarded me the email that his client got was when I noticed that I was like, oh my, like this didn't come from me. And then so I realized the email address at top was not my email address.
Yeah.
So that one was a bit concerning, and thank God that the agent called, because if the buyer had just gone ahead and done it, again, they would have been out of their money.
Exactly, yeah. And you hit the nail on the head. People are busy.
Yeah.
That's kind of the operative word right now. Everybody has a lot that's going on.
Yep.
And buying or selling a home is not something that most people do every day. I mean, it is for my investor clients that I work with.
Sure.
We're buying and selling multiple properties at a time. But when it comes to your home buyer or home seller who it's their one property, they haven't bought or sold or transacted in several years, not only do they already have their jobs, their families, everything else that's going on, but now it's like, oh, now I need to sell a house.
Right.
And here's a slew of stuff that comes with it. So it is really important. I feel like, I can't stress this point enough. Whenever you are planning on sending money, whether it's your initial deposit or your closing funds, always, 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 with no exception, call and speak with the escrow officer that is on the file, because it is just one small step that you can take that could save you a world of trouble in the future. So highly, highly recommend that.
Yes.
Okay, I think we have beat that topic to a pulp. I hope that message has come across loud and clear to my buyer clients. So let's talk about these escrow instructions and the opening package, right?
Yes.
Because it's kind of like a thing. It happens.
Sure.
Here's your opening package. What is in the opening package? Talk us through what people can expect when that opening package comes through.
So for a seller, the opening package would consist of the escrow instructions, which is based off of the purchase contract, that of all of the terms and conditions that the buyer and seller have agreed to. It's the commission instructions, which allows us to pay the agents at closing. Statement of information, a 1099 for taxes, a 593 tax withholding certificate, which has to be completed. In the great state of California, anytime that you sell real property that is not your principal residence, you are subject to a 3 1/3% withholding based off of the purchase price that has to be paid to the franchise tax board at the close of escrow. So that form tells us whether or not that property is or was the seller's principal residence, so that we know whether or not we do have to do that tax withholding. And of course, the grant deed is included as well. So that is the document that the sellers will need to sign and have notarized, which gets recorded at closing, that officially transfers the property from the seller to the buyer.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. And then what about for the buyer's opening package?
The buyer's opening package would consist of the escrow instructions, the statement of information. We send them a form that asks for their lender information if we haven't been provided it already, as well as their forwarding address, so we know where to send the recorded grant deed once we close. There's a form in there that asks for their vesting, so that we know how it is that they want to take on title. If they're married, if they're single, if they're divorced, if they want to put it into their LLC, if they want to put it into their trust. So this is the information that we need from them so that we know how to vest them onto the grant deed.
Right. Wonderful. Okay. So there are two distinct packages for both the buyer and the seller. A lot of them have some similar stuff in there, but for different purposes, right?
Yep.
And so both parties sign their respective documents and they submit it to you. Most of the stuff can be DocuSigned, right?
Correct.
But not everything can be DocuSigned.
Not
so
everything.
let's talk about, because that's, one of the gifts of technology. We don't have to. Do you remember when like the forms were the triplicates? We had to press
Oh,
really
yes.
hard. Yeah, we go back then. We're old school. But now, thankfully, we have electronic signatures, and it makes a lot of the paperwork, of which there is a lot of paperwork.
There is a lot.
It makes it a lot easier to go through and sign and keep track of. But let's talk about those specific documents that cannot be DocuSigned. They need to be signed in person and or perhaps notarized. What are those?
For our office, there is a document called a consent for use of electronic signatures. So this allows us to go ahead and accept anything that they've signed electronically as if it was an original. Now, that document does require a wet signature. It doesn't have to be notarized, but it cannot be DocuSigned. The other document that absolutely cannot be DocuSigned is the grant deed. That does have to be signed and notarized. And then there is the disbursement of proceeds. So the seller needs to complete the form telling us how it is that they want their proceeds sent to them at closing. Do they want a check? Do they want a wire? If they want a wire, they provide us with their bank information so that we know where to send their funds once we close.
Great, wonderful. And also with regards to the logistics of this stuff, you know, sometimes people come into your office to sign the documentation. Other times, do you end up sending a notary to them? Can they mail these to you? You know, what for these wet ink signature required documents? What are the procedures like?
It can be done any way that is most convenient to the seller. We obviously would prefer that the seller come in to sign them, only because it's a lot easier to explain things. You know, when they get a package via DocuSign, a lot of these things they're looking at and they're like, I don't know, like, why do you need this information? So if they're physically in the office and we can actually sit down with them and complete the package for them, it does make the process for them a lot easier. Otherwise, if coming to the office is not an option for them, we can send the majority of them to them electronically. If they aren't good with DocuSign, where they would rather complete it, that's fine too. We can email them a PDF for which they can print, complete, sign, and then they can email it back to us. You know, at the day of electronics, we don't necessarily need original signatures anymore, with the exception of those few documents. Or, like you said, we can go ahead and send out a notary to them. You know, if the seller is in Illinois or if the seller is in New York, we can go ahead and send a mobile notary out to them so that they can not only complete their package, but get the documents notarized that need to be notarized.
That's awesome. Now, what happens in the situation where a seller is out of the country?
Oh, those lovely sellers
Those
that like to
lovely
be out of
sellers
the
that are
cellar,
out of the country
country,
during the escrow
during the escrow process.
process.
They are so
Yay.
much fun. Well, unfortunately, if you are not physically here in the great United States, you would have to go to an American embassy in order to get the documents notarized. You would have to make an appointment. Depending on where you are at, sometimes those appointments can be a month out. They can be 2 months out. You can get it in a week. It just truly depends. So, you know, what we try to avoid is that if we know that the seller is going to be going to Europe on vacation for 2 weeks and that 2 week span is right in the middle of us trying to close a transaction, or, you know, right at the end of us trying to close a transaction, that we get them to sign their paperwork before they leave. And then that way they don't have to be concerned or worried about trying to get to the American embassy to get these documents notarized.
So the good news for sellers that are out of the country is that there are solutions.
Correct.
But one solution is much easier than the other.
Yes.
and that solution is to just sign everything and be prepared, communicate with your agent and escrow in advance about when you will be out of the country. And then that way you don't have to interrupt your vacation
Exactly.
to go find and be at the American embassy in whatever country that you're at.
Yep.
To sign some documents.
Correct.
So,
you know, I mean, I know that some sellers, you know, if it's an emergency situation, you know, their parents actually live in another country and something's come up and they have to go see their parents. I mean, obviously that's an exception. And in those type of situations, depending on how long they're going to be gone, it might just be as simple, just delay the closing until they can get back. It just kind of depends on where we're at with the transaction, what the situation is. is the buyer willing to be understanding and cooperative to go ahead and just wait a few extra more days until the seller can go ahead and take care of what they need to take care of?
I think you just right now brought up such an important point, and it is all about communication in any sort of a transaction, leading up to escrow, during escrow, any kind of relationship, period. I don't care if it's romantic relationship, friendship, business
right.
relationship. The communication aspect is so key. And bringing this back into how it affects an escrow, yes, going into an escrow process, they can be, you and I have closed escrows in as short as 10 days. I think that's the quickest we have closed an escrow from start to finish. And then not too long ago was our record long one, which was a year and 2 months.
Yes.
A 1 year and 2 month long escrow.
That
right?
was quite a feat.
Woo, it was quite a feat.
I think we actually went out and celebrated after that one closed.
We did. We did. Oh man, that was a good one. And to that point, that would have never closed had communication not been present between the parties, because there are delays. It was not supposed to be a year and 2 month long escrow. But that property, the circumstances, surrounding the sale of that property were rather complicated.
Yes.
The courts were involved. The police were involved. Squatters were involved. Drug addicts were involved. And fortunately, there were, on both sides, very cooperative buyers and sellers who understood what needed to be done, in order to do everything by the law.
Right.
And make sure that all the parties were protected. So that being said, escrow periods can be modified, they can be shortened, they can be lengthened per mutual agreement for any number of reasons.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's the key word there, is mutual agreement. Everything in an escrow transaction has to be mutually agreed upon. If the seller agrees and the buyer does not, we can't do anything.
Because you're the neutral third party.
Because we are the neutral third party. So, we have to have both parties agree. And the communication and what you had talked about is the cooperation. It's if you have steady communication in a transaction and you have cooperating parties, and not necessarily so with just the buyer and the seller, it's got to be everybody. Like, an escrow transaction is a team, right? We are all a team, and the ending goal is all the same for every single one of us. So if we can all work together and we all do what it is that we do in order for all the pieces to come together so that it's a nice puzzle
right.
that gets put together at the end, obviously sellers walk away being able to sell the property. The buyers have themselves a brand new home, well, not brand new home, but a new home.
A new home for them,
A new home for them to, start their life or retire in, or whatever their situation is. And of course, title does their thing, escrow does our thing, real estate agency their thing. So as long as everybody can work together and be cooperative with each other, I think things run a lot more smoother than you do if you have parties that just don't want to do what it is that they need to do in order to go ahead and get the transaction closed.
Right, yeah. And I love that you use the analogy of a team, because it truly is all about teamwork, just because there are so many moving parts. When a property or when a transaction enters escrow, it's not just the escrow team that's involved. You have the escrow team, you have the title team, you often have a lender, right, from the buyer side. You have the buyer, you have the seller. You may have an attorney on either side. If it's a probate transaction, we're working on one now where there is an attorney involved, right?
Yep.
You have the real estate brokers, right?
Yep.
You have the insurance agent. Insurance has become a really big thing here in California in light of the natural disasters. We've got earthquakes, we've got fires. Insurance companies are running out of the state, and lenders aren't planning on lending if there is no insurance in place.
Correct.
So, all of these different team members kind of converge into this one escrow process, and each one has their own role that they play in direct communication with you. So you're kind of like the nucleus of this thing.
It's a good analogy.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you really
Absolutely.
are. So, like, with regards to, you had mentioned title, title does their thing. Let's talk just briefly about what your relationship is with title, because they send us what's called the preliminary title report.
Correct.
Right? That shows us the chain of title. And escrow can't close, you can't close your file unless there are certain items that have been cleared
Correct.
from that preliminary title report.
Correct.
Right?
So-
So let's talk about that a little bit.
So when we get the preliminary title report, we do kind of give it a quick review. We just kind of see what's showing on there. If there's any easements, if there's any assessments, CC&Rs, things like that. All of those are going to stay with the property. Those just kind of run along with the chain of title. The things that don't stay would be mortgages that are, recorded against the property, liens that are recorded against the property, tax liens that might be recorded against the property, all that kind of stuff. So those will show on the preliminary title report as well, and those are what have to be cleared in order for us to close. So that's why it's so critical for the seller to get us back their paperwork as soon as possible, because it's that tells us who it is that they have to pay off. Because the deed that's recorded against the property for their mortgage, they may have got it back in 2015, and since then it's sold from lender to lender to lender to lender. And so we just kind of need to know, like, who are you currently paying, because it may not be the same person that is shown on that original deed of trust that got recorded. Right. So then we can request the payoff demands. If there is a lien or a judgment, first we obviously want to make sure that it is the seller's, and then we may have to reach out to the attorney that is showing on the lien, the franchise tax board if it's a tax lien, or the IRS if it's a federal tax lien, things like that. So we just kind of need to make sure that all of that gets taken care of, obviously, because it does need to be taken care of before we can close.
Right. So that is your relationship with title. You're like that. You're that middle person between the title company who is issuing the title insurance policy and the seller who needs to provide you with certain information to make sure that certain items are cleared off of the chain of title. And you also work with the lender as well, not just the lender who is who holds the current mortgage on the property, because you'll order a payoff demand from them, but also the buyer's lender if the buyer is procuring financing. Correct?
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about your relationship with the buyer's lender, because it's one of the first things I do when I'm representing a buyer is I'll get escrow in touch with the buyer's lender and make sure that the buyer's lender has a copy of the purchase agreement. Right. Okay. So talk to me about how you two relate.
So the buyer's lender will need a copy, obviously, of the purchase agreement. They do like to see a copy of the escrow instructions. And then our relationship with the lender is more of a, what is it that you need from us in order for you to go ahead and start, finish, process the loan for the buyer. A lot of times lenders will need a statement of, not a statement of information, I'm sorry, a estimated closing statement. This shows all of the fees and costs that would be charged to the buyer so that they can disclose those fees along with their fees to the buyer, so that the buyer can have an understanding of what kind of funds it is or what kind of fees it is that are being charged to them through the transaction. And then we just work with them to make sure that any conditions that they have that they may need from us, like I said, whether it be the escrow instructions, or if the lender needs to know how the buyer's vesting is going to read, so that they can make sure that they have that properly on the deed of trust that they're going to record against the property. Anything that they would need from us or title in order for them to go ahead and clear all of their conditions.
Right. And I know oftentimes every time there's a lender involved, having a proper homeowner's insurance policy in place is a condition of the loan being funded. And so that is also a really important element. So now we've got title, we've got the lender, we've got the insurance company, we've got you, certainly at the center of all of this. Talk to us a little bit more about the closing statements that you had mentioned that you provide to the buyer, and also the seller will get one as well. What can, when you're preparing those, what items are typically included in there?
So the closing statements are kind of like the checkbook of escrow. It shows all the money coming in and all the money going out. It is what shows who's being paid what, who needs to be paid, proration of property taxes, proration of HOA dues, if that's the cost, what the lender's costs were to the buyer, what title and escrow costs were to buyer and seller. And then that way it discloses to the buyer how much it is that we're going to need in order to close the transaction. And then it gives the seller an idea of how much their proceeds are going to be once they sell the house.
All right. That's super helpful information. And in fact, when I'm taking a listing, this is even before we open an escrow, and you're such a doll for doing this for me, because it's like every week you're getting emails from me, Jen, can you please prepare a seller net sheet for me?
I gladly do that.
I know, and you always
Absolutely.
do, and you always turn them around so quickly. Thank you. And let's face it, it's a really important element, because when anybody is selling a property, one of the first questions they ask is, well, okay, what's my property worth?
Right.
And then what am I going to net from the sale?
Correct.
Right? So having these estimated seller net sheets before, the actual final closing statement, these estimated seller net sheets are a wonderful tool that I utilize, thanks to you, whenever I go onto my listing appointments as I'm advising my sellers. I run my comparative market analysis to help the seller see what the market is suggesting the value of their home to be at this current point in time, what they can expect their common costs of sale to be, including escrow fees, title fees, HOA fees, brokerage commissions, etc., transfer taxes, so on and so forth. And then they'll see like a nice number at the bottom that they're hopefully happy with.
Absolutely.
Most of the time they are.
Well,
Most of the time they are. But it does certainly help put certain things into perspective when it comes to helping a seller prepare for the end. The end of the transaction.
And the same, I think, also goes for the buyer. Even if you have a buyer that's looking at a house, we can also do an estimate prior to going into escrow, just so the buyer can kind of have a feel of what it's going to cost them to purchase that house. Granted, we wouldn't be able to necessarily inform them what the lender would be charging them, but based off of the purchase price, what they anticipate their loan amount being, what title costs would be, what escrow costs would be, any other miscellaneous costs that we might know of that would typically be charged to the buyer through an escrow transaction, is also something that's a good tool for them too, just so that they can kind of get an idea of, I have $500,000 in the bank, is this going to be enough? Because if we come to closing and you're going to ask me for $510,000, I don't know that I'm going to necessarily have that extra $10,000. So it's a really good tool for the buyers as well, just to kind of give them an idea and a heads up of what it is that they're going to be anticipating and expecting.
I think that's a really excellent point to bring up, because many times, and this is especially true for first-time home buyers, they don't necessarily realize until they sit down for that consultation with me, that it's not just that purchase price of the home. There are other
closing costs.
Buyer's closing costs. And since August of last year, especially with the commission rules changing as well, that has also become a consideration for a lot of buyers. As an agent who represents both sellers and buyers, I do have this conversation with my buyer clients as well, as about how the commission laws have changed, how a seller, is not obligated to pay the buyer broker fee. And in the event that they want to purchase a particular home and the seller is not offering compensation, that's something that they would have to be responsible for. And we have these discussions up front, and they're good with it. But if you're just going around, I think I want to buy a home, and you're just walking into open houses or haphazardly, going about the process, there's a lot that you may not be prepared for, which is really why having that an in-depth consultation and,
Yes.
perhaps getting a buyer's estimated
Sure.
closing statement would be really, really important.
Unless you got $1 million in the bank and you're just like, oh, let me just go find something to buy. And
Yeah, exactly. And here in LA, $1 million not going to get too much.
It might get you a nice condo.
Yeah, it'll get you a very nice condo. Yes, it will. But yeah, I think it just goes to show that there is a lot that goes into various elements of the transaction, and it's never just as cut and dry as sometimes real estate reality TV shows make it seem to be. And there is a lot that goes into it. So it's really important to exercise diligence and educate yourself as a consumer, whether you're a buyer or a seller, so that you can be best prepared to make informed decisions. And clearly I can't emphasize the importance of surrounding yourself with an amazing team.
Yes.
So I feel super fortunate to have you and your team in my corner backing up me and my clients, as you have for all of these years. Really it's such an integral part of what I do, and I always know that I can count on you, whether it's through email or phone call, whatever it is that I need to really help, advise me on certain things. Yeah.
Sending you your estimated closing statements at 2:00 in the morning.
Oh yeah. Thank you. So I don't know why you don't sleep, but
that night was I forgot. Oh no! And I knew you needed them, so I made sure I got you them.
You have always pulled through. Thank you so very much.
It is such a pleasure to work with you. You are, and I tell you this all the time, you are one of the most amazing real estate agents I have ever worked with in my entire career. And I truly do wish that so many more were like you, because it really would make these escrow transactions run a lot more smoother.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think it comes down to just really loving what you do and loving who you work with. And I've always said I work with the best clients. For me, it starts with my clients and then it goes on to my team. I feel so fortunate to truly feel that whenever my phone rings and I see your name pop up, or one of your team members' names pop up, or Mark Stipkovich's name pop up, or my clients' names pop up, I don't get a pit in my stomach like, oh my God, why do I need to talk to this person? It's like, yes, so-and-so's calling. What do they need? How can I help? What are we doing? Let's do this.
Exactly.
Whatever it is. And it's very energizing to me and rewarding to me personally to really have good people around. So thank you so much for being
my pleasure.
Truly such a pleasure to work with, and a very trusted resource. I feel like there is so much more that we could get into if we really wanted to get into the weeds of things, which I don't particularly want to do, because we could be opening up a Pandora's box. Then we'll need to order lunch and and going to spend the weekend here. One particular important element, though, that I do want us to address while we're here today is talking about credits or price reductions and how they play out in escrow, because inevitably what happens in all these real estate transactions, and in California, all real estate transactions per the California Residential Purchase Agreement are as-is sales, unless otherwise agreed.
Right.
Okay. Now, there are certain things that sellers are by law required to do, but everything else is truly as is, and the buyer has their right, and in my opinion, their responsibility to do their due diligence.
Absolutely.
And so the process typically goes like this. We go out, we take a look at properties, they finally fall in love with a particular home and choose to write an offer. We negotiate back and forth. I advise them on market value. We go under contract. Everyone's happy. Inspections happen, and oh boy, something came up. A big surprise that was not visible to the naked eye when we were walking through. It was some foundation issue or sewer line issue, whatever it may be, and now it's going to cost a lot of money to rectify this issue with the property. So inevitably what happens is we come to the point where before contingencies are due to be removed, we submit a request for repair or price reduction or credit or some combination thereof, right? Oftentimes, buyers prefer that the seller just issue a credit towards closing costs.
Right.
Okay, because that way the buyer can actually retain more control over which service providers they want to use. And this can't be done unless escrow is involved, because these credits and debits are going to be reflected on the closing statement.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And also, in addition to you being involved, if there's a lender involved, what happens?
Yeah. The lender definitely needs to be involved. And depending on the amount, you may have to do a price reduction as opposed to a credit, because lenders typically will only allow a credit to be for as much as whatever the buyer's closing costs are.
Exactly.
So if the buyer's closing costs are only $15,000, but they want a credit from the seller for $35,000, then you either need to do a price reduction or, like you said, a combination of a price reduction and a credit.
Right.
The only thing that we try to get the buyers to understand is that this is a credit. It is not a check that will be sent to you at the close of escrow.
Right.
So I have unfortunately had a few situations where the buyers didn't quite understand that. They were going to be getting a credit from the seller of $10,000, and then we close escrow and they get their refund and they're like, well, where's my $10,000?
Yeah. But those were not my buyers, because
No.
let's just be very abundantly clear.
No.
Those were not my buyers.
Not at all. I mean, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. You know,
Yeah.
buyers misunderstand what it is that they're getting from the seller, you know,
Right.
and then you have to go and explain to them that, no, it's a credit. Like I asked you to bring me in $10,000 less than what I was expecting you to bring me into. So you already have that $10,000. It's sitting in your bank account. So,
Right,
you know,
exactly,
something
yeah.
like that. So,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that, you know, people kind of need to remember and understand is that, you know, lenders play a critical role in this too. And if it's going to be a large credit, I do try to make sure that the agents, as well as the buyers and sellers, understand that, okay, fine, we can issue this credit for $20,000, but if the lender doesn't allow for all of that money to be used, we are going to have to reduce that credit to what it is that the lender will allow.
Exactly. And I think that's where, again, that communication piece comes in. That's so important. I'm in the middle of an escrow right now where we have reached that critical stage where all the inspections were done and the buyers are still invested in buying the home. They still love it. However, a couple of really big ticket items that not even the seller knew about,
Right.
pertaining to important systems of the home, now need to be addressed. And we're talking about a sewer line that's broken in multiple places.
Oh,
you
my.
know, is going to need a full replacement. So, you know, one of the first things I did was I called the lender and I was like, hey, can you please give me an estimate of what the closing costs are going to be?
Sure.
Because I have some business to take care of on the other end of this. So I think it is really critical as the real estate brokers, who are really the guides for their clients in this transaction, to take a very proactive role and get as much of the information as they need as possible up front, so that they can educate their clients as to how much they can reasonably expect to be able to ask for in terms of a credit or price reduction.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And certainly, you know, the lender, the closing costs can vary, you know, depending on whether they are, you know, adding an impound account, you know, for taxes and insurance versus if the buyer is going to be paying taxes and insurance separately.
Correct.
So that amount can vary. But once it's all said and done, and assuming the parties come to an agreement as to what that credit or price reduction or repair or some combination thereof is, that's where the real estate brokers would draft an amendment, right? And the parties would fully execute that, and that would be sent to you.
Correct.
So that escrow can then be informed that everybody is on the same page. There's that mutual agreement, because the buyer can't just say, hey, escrow, I want a credit of $20,000 from the seller. You know, and that will never happen.
No.
So escrow knows that it is a mutually agreed upon condition of the contract now, and you make sure that by the end of it all, everything is balanced.
Yep.
And everybody has the monies that they need. Any credits that have been given to the buyer are credited toward their recurring and non-recurring closing costs. That way it's less money that they need to bring to the closing table. But you're right, it's not a check.
It's not a
in
check
hand.
at the closing.
It's not a wire directly. It's not direct
Nope.
deposited
Nope.
into their account. All right, so I feel like we have done a really great job of covering a lot of really important escrow topics, and without digging any more into the weeds over here. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that, as an escrow officer, you would like to share with our viewers today?
Well, I think one of the other really important things to kind of keep in mind is the more we can get done prior to opening escrow, the better. So if we can get the city reports that are required ordered, if we can get the HOA documents ordered, or mostly the preliminary title report or the natural hazards disclosure report, these reports let us be able to kind of see what's coming, right? And especially with the preliminary title report. So, if we get a preliminary title report in that's really, really ugly, it's got a lot of deeds, it's got a lot of liens, it's got judgments, it's got, potentially a deed of trust that got recorded back in 1980 that it still has to be taken care of. So this allows us to be able to work with the title company to say, what is it that you're going to need in order to clear this item so that we can go ahead and close, once we're ready to close. So any type of being able to get in front of things is always a great idea, because then that allows us to be able to have everything in and taken care of before the clock with escrow even starts ticking.
Right.
If we wait until we open up escrow to request these reports, by the time we get the preliminary title report in, when we open up escrow, we're already usually about 2 to 3 days in. And then we see all these liens. And so, we've lost this time. So if there's a way that we can go ahead and request these things ahead of time so that we can take a look and know what it is that we're going to face, so that if there's any difficulties or complications that are going to need to be taken care of, we can get those resolved before we actually go into escrow. And you actually are one of the really good ones that goes ahead and says, hey, Jen, I got this listing, we're about 2 weeks out from hitting the market. Let's, can we get the LA report ordered? Can we get the preliminary title report ordered? And then that way, once you actually are able to get an accepted offer and we go into escrow, we are all set to ready to go. And we're just kind of like on cruise control to have a smooth and successful closing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. No, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because just like what you said, there's a lot that can come up. But we already know, given our experience, the types of stuff that can come up. So
Right.
Why not just be proactive and get ahead of it? And so that's true. In addition to, even before I get the listing, I bug you to give me that net sheet. And
Yep.
you're always such a doll, and you
Yep.
get it over to me. But as soon as that listing agreement is signed, I'm already
Let's go.
connecting
Let's
you.
go.
You
Yeah.
know, title. If there's an attorney involved, do we need to get legal documents over to you? If the property's in the city of LA, we know that 9A report can take a short time or a long time, depending on what's going on with the city.
And especially with those 9A reports, what mostly comes up on them that can kind of stall us is the brush lien clearance. And for
Yes.
some reason, all of a sudden, that has been coming up a lot lately. And so not only do you have, the brush lien clearance that comes up, but it takes the city about 7 to 10 business days to get us the report once we order it anyways. And then if there's a brush lien clearance that shows up on it, it's another 15 to 20 days.
Right. That could throw off
Before-
an entire timeline.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right now I actually have 2 of them that are kind of along the same scenario. We ordered we haven't gone into escrow yet. The agent did come to me and ask me to order the 9A report. We did. The 9A report came in, there's a brush lien clearance. Well, okay, now we've ordered the demand from the LAFD so that we can know. Again, we're still not in escrow, but now when we do go into escrow, all of that's already taken care of.
Absolutely.
And we don't waste time in trying to obtain these documents. I have a opposite situation where it was 10-day, all cash, we have to have that 9 a.m. in order to close, and it takes the city, 7 to 10 business days. So
Right.
on a 10-day escrow, when you don't already have that report in, it could potentially delay your closing.
It's not a 10-day escrow anymore.
And in this instance, we got the 9 a.m. probably about day 7, and there's a brush lien. So now we are
Surprise!
delayed
Yeah.
by about 2 weeks before we can even close, because obviously we do have to have that demand in from the fire department to confirm whether or not there is any monies due for any brush lien clearance that they may have had to do.
Right, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up this point, because being proactive in any circumstance, whether you're representing a seller or a buyer, can save so much time.
So much time.
And time is of the essence. All of these agreements, they're contracts.
Right.
They're all terms of a contract, and the parties must act in accordance with the terms of the contract. And without these timelines, you don't have a valid contract.
Correct.
So these timelines are here to be enforced.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, they can be changed for sure.
Sure.
Sometimes it's easy to change them when everybody's on the same page. Sometimes it seems like a damn near impossibility that you can change them, depending on the parties' sometimes disparate needs. Everybody has the same goal of closing, but somebody's okay delaying. Well, somebody really needed to close yesterday, so then it could create some complications. So to the extent that that the team, the brokers, the escrow team, title team, everybody can be proactive and communicating in advance, it'll just make things go a lot more smoothly.
A lot more smoothly.
And then we'll get that email from you at the end that
Congratulations!
says, "Congratulations!
We are
recorded,
closed."
we have closed."
Yes.
And then I get to make my favorite phone call of the entire transaction, which is, "Congratulations, you have closed escrow."
Yep.
And then we pop the champagne.
And then we pop the
and
champagne.
celebrate for everybody. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Thank you for having me.
so much for being a part of my trusted team. Thank you also
It
so
is
much
my
for
pleasure.
having become a friend of mine.
Oh.
You are truly such a doll. I value you and your friendship and your expertise so much. And thank you for being here today.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you also for joining me again. I hope you have found this episode with Jen to be super informative and to help demystify some of the elements of the escrow process. As always, I am here for you to support you and guide you through your real estate transactions, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, take care.
Great.